In the evening hours of January 8, 1993, Pedro Maldonado received a panic call from his sister-in-law. His brother Guadalupe, an employee of Braun's Chicken and Pasta in Palatine, Illinois, hadn't returned home from work and was now several hours late. This was highly unusual, and Guadalupe's wife was quickly becoming worried something had happened. So she asked Pedro to go to his brother's work and see what was going on. After arriving at the restaurant, it was immediately obvious something was terribly wrong. The interior was pitch black with the lights out even on machines that were typically left powered on. Pedro peered into the window but saw no signs of his brother. There were several other cars in the parking lot, most notably the one belonging to the franchise owners Richard Ellenfelt and his wife Lynn. They'd both been working the store that evening with a small crew, which, along with Pedro's brother, included 32-year-old Thomas Menz, 31-year-old Marcus Nelson, and local high school students 16-year-old Michael Castro and 17-year-old Rico Salas. The store typically closed at 9 p.m., but everyone knew that it was common for them to accept late orders and that their real closing time was closer to 9:30. The already anxious scene escalated tenfold when a police officer suddenly showed up, having been contacted by the parents of Michael Castro after their son never came home from his work shift. The officer spoke to Pedro briefly before taking a look around the exterior of the restaurant. After a few minutes of searching, he noticed an open door in the back of the building, an employee-only exit which was sitting slightly ajar. Walking inside brought him to a hallway in the back of the kitchen, which led directly to a walk-in freezer that was sitting slightly open. The officer immediately realized something was wrong, as blood was everywhere, but it was inside the walk-in which had the most gruesome discovery of all. All 7 restaurant employees lay dead on the cold freezer floor. It was complete overkill, with the group being utterly ravaged by bullets. There were also signs of a violent struggle, indicating that at least some employees had tried to fight off their assailants. A crowd started to gather as concerned friends and family stood nervously outside, with a fleet of police officers and detectives descending upon the store. From the opening moments, the case was hampered by an extraordinary lack of physical evidence. There were no security cameras, and given the sheer amount of foot traffic they saw on a daily basis, finding any physical evidence, then linking it to the killer would prove challenging. It seemed that shortly after the restaurant closed, one or multiple assailants had come through the front door under the guise of being last-minute customers. They ordered a 4-piece chicken meal with a medium drink, which was found in the trash next to the entrance, with just a single bite having been taken out of the food. A bullet was found in the roof of the dining room, which police theorized was a warning shot fired by one of the robbers after they dropped the guise of being paying customers. Shortly after that, the restaurant staff was taken to the back, where the Ellenfelds opened the office safe and emptied out somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,800 to $1,900. After the money was taken by the assailants, things seemed to have gone off the rails, and the robbery escalated to murder. All 7 of the employees were shot a significant number of times, with the perpetrator reloading his weapon multiple times and firing off dozens of rounds into the helpless group. Lynn Ellenfelt's throat had even been slashed prior to her being shot, which demonstrated this very grisly violence for the sake of violence mentality by the perpetrators. After all of the employees were dead, the killers proceeded to move their bodies to a walk-in freezer in the back of the building before cutting off the power via the breaker box and escaping through the employee exit. They had been reckless, violent, and incredibly dumb in choosing a relatively public target, but the fact of the matter was they had left very little behind in the way of evidence which could be linked back to them. Shell casings were useless without a gun to compare them to, and the hundreds of fingerprints found at the crime scene, combined with the public nature of the business, were hard to rely on. Given their only evidence was a single piece of chicken with a missing bite, it would seem that DNA could be an option. However, that technology was in its infancy at the time and was a few years away from becoming a mainstream investigative technique. Fortunately, though, the officers working this case were very forward-thinking. Hoping there was evidence on the chicken which could be used later down the line if and when the technology became available, they decided to freeze it and preserve it after they'd exhausted all the current era tests available to them. And as ridiculous as it might have seemed at the time, it would end up being one of the most critical decisions in this story. Over the next several years, police exhausted themselves chasing leads to find some kind of resolution for this horrific massacre. After all this, in 9 years though, there wasn't any sign of progress. Then in March of 2002, a bombshell tip would come to investigators that would blow everything wide open. In March of 2002, a woman named Ann Lockett contacted police and told them she knew the identity of the killers in the Braun's chicken massacre. She claimed her ex-boyfriend James Degorski and his friend Juan Luna had committed the heinous crime. Luna had actually been a former employee of the restaurant and was briefly interviewed by police back in 1993, but wasn't deemed a person of interest. Lockett described her relationship with Degorski as abusive and said he was a violent man with a bad temper. What really sparked investigators' interest, though, was a small, albeit gruesome detail within Lockett's story. She said that Luna and Degorski told her when they shot one of the younger victims, the young man proceeded to vomit up French fries he'd eaten earlier that evening. This was in fact true, but was something police hadn't released to the public. So it was safe to say this was the best lead the team had in years, and they acted immediately, finding Luna and bringing him in for questioning, then obtaining a DNA sample from him in hopes new technology would let them extract DNA from the chicken, which had been frozen for several years. This hunch would turn out to be correct, and amazingly, investigators were able to extract a full DNA profile from saliva found on almost decade-old frozen fried chicken, and that profile was a match for Juan Luna's DNA. Luna initially confessed when confronted with this evidence, but would later recant, though not before implicating Degorski as well. He was charged with 7 counts of murder, and would eventually stand trial in 2007. Here his defense argued that his initial confession had been given under duress and threat from police. The jury, though, didn't quite buy it, and Luna was found guilty on all 7 counts and was sentenced to life in prison a short time later. Degorski would have a comparatively much stranger legal saga. Like Luna, he was initially arrested in 2002 after Lockett had come forward. However, while under arrest in the Cook County Jail, he was assaulted by a sheriff deputy, which resulted in him suffering multiple facial fractures. He would file a lawsuit for damages and was actually successful in obtaining a judgment, despite the information you're about to find out in this video. Justice is blind, as they say. The rest of Degorski's case wouldn't go as well, though, as another ex-girlfriend of his named Eileen Bacala came forward and corroborated the story Lockett had initially told police. She also said James was a dangerous and violent man, and that James had confessed to murdering the staff at Braun's restaurant. She also knew the detail about one of the victims vomiting up French fries, making her story all the more believable. Degorski went on trial in 2009 and was subsequently found guilty on 7 counts of murder, just like Luna had been. And just like Luna, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Degorski has continued to fight for his release in the years since, and claims that Luna was the sole perpetrator, a message which has for the most part fallen on deaf ears, judging from how his appeals have gone. He will very likely spend the remainder of his life in prison, bringing an end to this decade-long saga and hopefully closure to the families of some of the victims. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.